What if I told you that one of the world's greatest empires was crushed by an army that had almost no chance? We are talking about the moment when the heavy, steel-clad aristocracy of England, considered invincible, clashed with a stubborn nation armed mainly with spears and a desperate will for freedom. This is not just a story of a battle, it is a story of how strategy, knowledge of the terrain, and iron discipline can negate overwhelming numerical and technical superiority. Scotland against England, Robert Bruce against Edward II. It was a clash of two worlds. Watch the video to the end to find out how Robert Bruce managed to turn his army's weaknesses into its greatest weapon and what cunning trick finally broke the spirit of the English knights. I will reveal a secret that will change your perception of kings. To understand how Scotland was able to win, you must first understand its leader, Robert Bruce. By 1314, he was no longer the desperate fugitive he had been a few years earlier, but his path to that point had been incredibly difficult. He was crowned, but he did not control most of his country, and the King of England considered him a mere rebel and traitor. His enemies were not only the English, but also powerful Scottish clans who contested his right to the throne. Bruce spent years on the run, hiding in the mountains and on the islands, waging a guerrilla war. He learned to be patient, cunning, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. He realized that he could not defeat England in open battle using its own rules. His army was the land itself, the marshes, hills, and forests that exhausted the heavy English knights and provided shelter for his light troops. These guerrilla tactics were humiliating for the English knights, but incredibly effective. Every castle taken from the English was not simply captured, but methodically destroyed. Bruce understood that he did not have the resources to hold dozens of fortresses. Instead, he deprived the English of their bases of support, forcing them to either leave or live in constant tension in a hostile country. It was a scorched earth strategy against himself, but it worked. It rallied around him those who were willing to go all the way. By the time of the Battle of Bannockburn, Robert Bruce was already a master of unconventional warfare. He was not just a warrior, he was a strategist who thought in terms of terrain, psychology, and logistics. He knew his enemy's strengths and weaknesses better than the enemy itself. His army, although poorly equipped by English standards, was incredibly motivated and disciplined. Bruce's soldiers fought not for feudal obligations or pay, but for their homes, their families, and their right to exist. It was an army that believed unconditionally in its leader because he shared all their hardships. He did not sit in a castle while his men fought. He was in the front lines, risking everything with them. This experience of guerrilla warfare shaped the plan that led to victory. Bruce had no intention of fighting the English cavalry on their terms. He was going to lure them into a trap where all their power and wealth would be useless. He was preparing not just a battle, but a methodical humiliation for the most powerful army in Europe. It was this contrast between the two leaders, the determined and experienced Bruce and the self-confident Edward II, that became one of the key factors. One fought for the survival of his nation, the other for the restoration of his father's authority. The stakes were extremely high for both sides, but only one of them was ready for such a game. Bruce honed his skills in small skirmishes, but now he faced his greatest test. He had to stop the largest army ever to invade Scotland. He could no longer retreat or hide. The time had come for a decisive battle. He proved that a king is not the one who wears the crown, but the one who is able to lead people in the darkest times. His journey from outcast to national hero was almost complete. Only one most important step remained, the step on the field at Bannockburn. This transformation of a leader, honed by years of hardship, was Scotland's first and perhaps most important unconventional weapon. What do you think? Can Bruce's guerrilla tactics, based on evading battle and destruction, be considered truly heroic in the medieval sense? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other stories about the great strategies of the past. Are you ready to learn the truth about why this battle was inevitable? To understand the scale of the English threat, one must look at the shadow cast by Edward II's father, King Edward I. He was nicknamed the Hammer of the Scots for good reason. He was an experienced, determined, and ruthless military leader who devoted years of his life to conquering Wales and Scotland. Edward I reformed the English army, making it one of the most effective military machines of its time. He masterfully combined the power of heavy knightly cavalry with the destructive force of Welsh longbows. It was he who won a crushing victory over the Scots at Falkirk in 1298, where archers simply shot down the Scottish infantry formations. His death in 1307, literally on the doorstep of Scotland, was a real gift for the Scots. His son Edward II, who was the complete opposite of his father, ascended the throne. Edward II had neither military talent nor his father's obsession with the Scottish campaign. He was more interested in court life and his favorites than in the harsh craft of war. This neglect gave Robert Bruce precious time. While the English king was busy with internal squabbles and conflicts with his own barons, Bruce methodically, castle by castle, reclaimed Scotland. The English garrisons, left without support and supplies, surrendered one after another. By 1314, the situation had become critical for Edward II. The loss of Scotland was not just a territorial loss, it was a blow to the prestige of the crown. The barons, who despised his favorites, demanded that he take decisive action to prove his right to the throne. He had no choice but to raise an army and settle the Scottish question once and for all. And he assembled an army the likes of which England had never seen before. It was a huge feudal army, the very embodiment of the power of the English crown. Thousands of knights and heavily armed horsemen, tens of thousands of infantrymen, and of course, deadly archers. It was an army created to crush any resistance. At the head of this armada were the most powerful barons of England, many of whom had personal scores to settle with the Scots, and were eager to reclaim their lands. Their confidence was boundless. They were going to Scotland not so much to fight as to punish the rebels and divide the spoils. The problem was that this cumbersome machine was designed for one type of warfare: large open battles where cavalry could charge and crush infantry. They were not prepared for Bruce's guerrilla tactics, let alone what he had in store for them on the battlefield. Their strength was also their main weakness. Edward II's army was a classic feudal army, powerful but poorly managed, torn apart by internal rivalries between barons. Edward II himself was not the kind of leader who could unite and inspire such an army. He was more of a symbol than a real commander. It was this army, heir to the glory of the Hammer of the Scots, but led by his weak son, that marched to Bannockburn. They were not just going into battle, they were going to the coronation of their triumph. But Bruce had his own plan. The English had steel in numbers, but the Scots had something their enemies did not: a brilliant tactical plan. In the next chapter, we will see how Robert Bruce used engineering rather than swords to prepare the battlefield. What I am about to show you was used by almost no one at that time. Robert Bruce knew that his army did not stand a chance against the English cavalry in open country. His only hope was to force the enemy to fight where he chose and on his terms. The choice of the battlefield was the first and perhaps the most important manifestation of his genius. He positioned his army south of the town of Stirling, blocking the old Roman road that the English were expected to use to approach. The position was perfectly chosen. On one flank, he was covered by dense forest, on the other by the winding Bannockburn River and a vast marshy lowland known as the Cars. This terrain was a nightmare for heavy cavalry. There was very little solid ground, and space for maneuver was severely limited. The English army was essentially forced to attack head-on through a narrow corridor where its numerical superiority was meaningless. But Bruce did not rely solely on nature. He decided to improve the battlefield, turning it into a deadly trap. This decision was not at all chivalrous, but it was incredibly practical. He applied his experience of guerrilla warfare on the scale of an entire battle. His soldiers spent several days before the battle doing work that had nothing to do with military exercises. They dug. Along the entire road where the English were to attack, hundreds, if not thousands, of camouflage pits were dug, which were called wolf pits. Each pit was knee-deep, and a sharpened stake was stuck into each one. These pits were covered with branches and turf, making them completely invisible to an attacking horseman. Falling into such a trap, a warhorse would inevitably break its leg, incapacitating both itself and its heavily armed rider. It was a simple but devilishly effective means of countering the enemy's main striking force. But that was not all. In areas where the ground was too hard for pits, the Scots used another invention: hedgehogs. These were special metal spikes welded or tied together, so that one spike always pointed upward. Thousands of these devices were scattered across the field. For heavy cavalry, this was an insurmountable obstacle. They were designed specifically to cripple hooves. Even if the knights noticed them, they had to dismount under fire to clear the way, losing precious time and all their offensive momentum. Thus, even before the battle began, Bruce dictated his terms. He forced the English to move slowly, cautiously, and only where it was convenient for him. He turned the battlefield into a giant chessboard, where every move by the English was calculated in advance and met with a trap. This preparation also had a huge psychological effect on his own army. The soldiers saw that their leader had a well-thought-out plan. They weren't just waiting for their fate, they were actively preparing for victory. This gave them confidence that their spears weren't the only thing standing between them and the English armada. When the English knights, shining in the sun, arrived on the field, they saw before them not just an army of peasants, but a carefully prepared defensive position. They did not yet know about the pits and spikes, but they must have already sensed that this battle would be unlike anything they had known before. If you like how strategy and engineering defeat brute force, give this video a thumbs up. Guess what happened next? Although both sides were preparing for a decisive clash, the immediate cause of the battle was one particular fortress, Stirling Castle. Perched on an impregnable rock, this castle was the key to all of Scotland. It controlled the vital crossing over the River Forth, which divided the north and south of the country. A year before the battle, in 1313, Robert Bruce's brother, Edward Bruce, laid siege to this last major English stronghold in Scotland. The siege was long and unsuccessful. The garrison, commanded by Sir Philip Mowbray, held out steadfastly. Unable to take the castle by storm, Edward Bruce took an extremely risky and presumptuous step. He made a knightly agreement with Mowbray. If by the middle of the following summer, namely June 24th, 1314, the English king did not come to the rescue and lift the siege, the garrison of Stirling would surrender the castle to the Scots. For medieval knights, such agreements were commonplace, but from a military point of view, it was madness. When Robert Bruce learned of this agreement, he was furious. His brother had effectively nullified his entire long-term strategy of guerrilla warfare. This agreement took away the Scots' main advantage, the ability to choose the time and place for battle. Now they were tied to a specific date in a specific place. They could no longer evade battle, retreat, and wear down the enemy. Edward II got exactly what he wanted, a legitimate reason to assemble an army and force the Scots into a decisive battle in which he believed he had every chance of victory. For Robert Bruce, this was the moment of truth. He could either renounce the treaty, which would be seen as cowardice and a breach of his knightly word, or accept the challenge. He chose the latter. He decided that if he was destined to fight, he would do so at the walls of Stirling, but on his own terms. Thus, Stirling Castle became the point on the map towards which both armies marched. For Edward II, it was a campaign to lift the siege and punish the rebels. For Robert Bruce, it was the final battle for his country's independence. This pact, concluded by Edward Bruce, turned the war of attrition into a duel with a countdown. The clock was ticking, and by June 1314, a huge English army had crossed the border and was slowly moving north. Their path lay straight to the place that Robert Bruce was already turning into an engineering trap. The English were confident that the Scots would either flee at the sight of their armada or be easily crushed in open battle. They did not know that they were not just going into battle, but into a carefully prepared field. They went to lift one siege, but found themselves in another, much more terrible one. The psychological pressure was enormous. The Scots could not retreat without losing face and surrendering Stirling. The English could not fail to come without admitting defeat in Scotland. Battle was inevitable. Now all that remained was to wait and see who would appear on the field first. In the next chapter, we will learn how the first day of this fateful clash unfolded. The first English troops reached the outskirts of Bannockburn on June 23rd, one day before the ultimatum expired. Confident in their superiority, the English vanguard decided to attack the Scottish positions immediately, without even waiting for the main forces to arrive. This led to two significant clashes that determined the morale of both armies. The first was the famous duel. A young English knight, Sir Henry de Bohun, spotted Robert Bruce himself in the Scottish ranks. The Scottish king was lightly armed and was moving around in a small cart, inspecting his troops. De Bohun, seeing this as a chance to end the war with a single blow, lowered his lance and rushed to attack the king. It was a classic knightly duel. A heavily armed warrior on a war horse against a lightly armed opponent. Bruce seemed to have no chance. However, he did not retreat. At the last moment, he dodged sharply, and as de Bohun rushed past, Bruce struck him with his battle axe, deciding the outcome of the duel in his favor. For the Scottish warriors watching this scene, it was a real miracle. Their king, their leader, had just defeated one of England's best knights in combat. The morale of the army soared. They saw this as a sign of impending victory. At the same time, while this duel was taking place, another detachment of English cavalry under the command of the Earl of Hereford and Sir Robert Clifford attempted to outflank the Scottish army and break through to Stirling. They moved across open ground, not expecting serious resistance. But Bruce had anticipated this maneuver as well. He had instructed one of his best commanders, Thomas Randolph, Earl of Moray, to guard this section. Randolph, at the head of his infantry unit, formed into a shield wall, a dense circular formation of spearmen, met the attack. The English knights looked with contempt at this hedgehog of spears. They were confident that their attack would simply sweep away the infantry, but they were mistaken. Attack after attack broke against the steel wall of Scottish spears. The knights could not break through the formation, and their horses refused to charge the steel-bristled mass. This was not just a skirmish, it was a test of the concept. The shield wall, which had failed at Falkirk because it was immobile, proved its effectiveness here under skilled command. The knights, suffering losses and failing to achieve success, were forced to retreat. The first day of the battle ended in a complete tactical and moral victory for the Scots. They repelled two cavalry attacks, and their king performed a feat that inspired the entire army. They proved to themselves that they could stand up to the formidable English knights. For the English, however, it was a cold shower. Their confidence was shaken. They realized that the Scots were not going to flee and were prepared to fight to the end. That evening, the English War Council met to decide what to do next. They still had an overwhelming numerical advantage, but the first round went to the Scots. Bruce's plan was working. Not only had he chosen the perfect terrain, but he had also inspired his men to do what seemed impossible. The battle was not yet won, but the tide was beginning to turn in Scotland's favor. What if I showed you how one night changed the course of history? The night of June 23, 24 was perhaps one of the most decisive in the history of both countries. While the Scottish camp, buoyed by the successes of the first day, was in a state of focused determination, the English camp was full of confusion and argument. The English command made a fatal mistake. Instead of staying on dry, firm ground, where their cavalry and archers would be effective, they decided to relocate. They moved their troops behind the Bannockburn River to the very marshy lowlands of Cars that Bruce had chosen as a trap. The reasons for this decision are still debated. Perhaps they wanted to be closer to the river for water. Perhaps they feared a night attack by the Scots and sought protection in the form of a water barrier. Whatever the case, they locked themselves into a narrow, marshy space. All night long, the huge English army tried to settle in this uncomfortable spot. Heavy wagons with supplies, war horses, thousands of soldiers, everything mixed together into a single unmanageable mass. Discipline broke down, and the knights and infantry were exhausted from the long march and the unsuccessful skirmishes of the first day. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the Scottish camp was completely different. Robert Bruce addressed his troops. He did not promise them an easy victory. He reminded them what they were fighting for: their homes, their families, their freedom. He offered anyone who had doubts or fears the chance to leave right now without shame. No one left. That night united the Scottish army. They were outnumbered, but they were on their own land. They were well rested, and they had a clear plan. They knew that at dawn they would either win or their nation would cease to exist. Another important incident occurred in the English camp. A Scottish knight serving on the English side, Sir Alexander Seton, secretly left the English camp and went to Robert Bruce. He told the king about the deplorable state of the English army, their low morale, poor position, and general disorganization. Seton convinced Bruce that if he attacked at dawn, he would take the English by surprise and win. This information was decisive. Until that moment, Bruce had adhered to defensive tactics. Now he realized that he had a chance not just to fight back, but to completely destroy the enemy. At dawn on June 24th, the Scottish army began to prepare for battle. They did not wait for the English to recover and line up for an attack. Bruce made a bold, unthinkable decision to attack himself. His small army of infantrymen, armed with spears, was to be the first to attack the most powerful cavalry in the world. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Bruce relied on discipline, surprise, and the trap that the English had set for themselves. Thus, the night before the main battle was not just a respite. It was a time when the English made a fatal strategic mistake, and the Scots made a decision that changed the course of the entire war. The morning promised to be hot. In the next chapter, we will see how the second and decisive day of the battle began. At dawn on June 24th, 1314, the English army was surprised to find that the Scots were not sitting in defense. Instead of waiting for an attack, the entire Scottish army, formed into 3 huge shield walls, began to move. It was an incredible sight. The hedgehogs, bristling with spears, moved slowly but inexorably forward, straight toward the stunned English. Bruce's decision was brilliant in its audacity. He did not wait for the English archers to take up their positions and start shooting at his immobile formations. As had happened at Falkirk, he imposed close combat on his own terms, in the very narrow and marshy terrain where the English cavalry could not maneuver. The English knights, taken by surprise by this maneuver, rushed into the attack. The vanguard, commanded by the Earl of Gloucester, one of the most powerful barons in England, crashed into the first Scottish shield wall, commanded by Edward Bruce. A desperate battle ensued, but this was not the kind of attack the English knights were used to. Instead of crushing the ranks of the fleeing infantry, they encountered an impenetrable wall of spears. There was no room for maneuver, and the attack faltered almost immediately. The Scottish shield walls were not just a defensive formation. Bruce turned them into an offensive weapon. Slowly, step by step, they pushed back the English army, preventing it from regrouping. It was like a slow but powerful press crushing a disorganized crowd. The heavy English cavalry, the pride of the nation, was helpless. In the crowd, they got in each other's way. Their horses couldn't get going, and the knights, knocked to the ground by their own weight and the crush, couldn't get up and became easy prey. The battle turned into a huge hand-to-hand combat, but one in which the Scottish spearmen had a clear advantage. They fought in tight formation, shoulder to shoulder, while the English army turned into an uncontrollable mass of individual fighters. The very traps that Bruce had prepared for defense now prevented the English from retreating. The pits and spikes that had been in front of the Scottish position were now behind the English vanguard, blocking their retreat and the approach of reinforcements. The English infantry, which followed the knights, simply could not enter the battle. It was blocked by its own retreating horsemen. Edward II's huge army, so formidable on the march, was in fact paralyzed by its own size and unfortunate position. The Scots, on the other hand, acted as a single organism. Their schiltrons slowly tightened the ring, pushing the English back to the river Bannockburn, which was behind them. The pressure was incredible, and the English formation began to crack at the seams. The battle was not yet won, but the turning point had already come. Bruce's forest of spears proved its superiority over Edward's forest of banners. The main striking force of the English, their heavy cavalry, was neutralized and suffered huge losses. But the English still had one trump card left, a trump card that had already brought them victory over the Scottish shield bearers once before, the Welsh archers. And at that moment, they finally entered the fray. While the English vanguard desperately tried to break through the wall of Scottish spears, the English archers finally found an opportunity to join the battle. They were Edward II's main hope, It was their accurate and frequent volleys that were supposed to thin out the ranks of the Scottish shield-bearers, create gaps, and allow the cavalry to do their job. Thousands of archers took up position on the flank and rained arrows down on the Scots. This maneuver was extremely dangerous. At Falkirk, it was precisely this that decided the outcome of the battle in favor of the English. The Scottish infantry, standing in tight formation, were perfect targets. The arrows began to take their toll. The Scottish ranks faltered under this deadly rain. Soldiers fell and gaps appeared in the formation. It seemed that history was repeating itself, and Bruce's strategic mistake of not taking the threat of archers into account would now lead to disaster. But Robert Bruce was not William Wallace. Not only did he remember the lessons of Falkirk, but he had also prepared for them. While his entire army consisted of infantry, he had a single cavalry unit, about 500 light horsemen under the command of Sir Robert Keith. Bruce kept this unit in reserve for this very purpose. At the moment when the English archers were absorbed in shooting and felt confident in their safety, Bruce gave the order. The light Scottish cavalry rushed out from behind cover and attacked the archers from the flank. This came as a complete surprise to the English archers. They had neither heavy armor nor lances to defend themselves against the cavalry. Their only weapon was the bow, which was useless in close combat. They were not prepared for such an attack. Sir Robert Keith's attack was lightning fast and utterly devastating. The Scottish horsemen crashed into the ranks of archers, scattering them. Panic ensued. The archers threw down their precious weapons and ran for their lives. This moment was decisive. In just a few minutes, the main tactical threat to the Scottish army was completely neutralized. Edward II had no more trump cards left. His cavalry was bogged down in battle, and his archers were scattered. The neutralization of the archers also had a huge psychological effect. The English army saw their most formidable weapon easily destroyed. At the same time, the Scottish shield-bearers, freed from the barrage, pressed forward with renewed vigor against the English center. Robert Bruce played his hand perfectly. He used his only cavalry unit at the only right moment, in the only right place. This pinpoint strike on the Achilles heel of the English army finally broke its battle order. Now the English army was doomed. It was caught in a vice, unable to attack, defend itself effectively, or retreat. The Scots, sensing victory was near, redoubled their efforts. The battle entered its final phase, the most tragic for the English. Bruce's discipline, strategy, and perfect use of reserves completely outmatched the brute force and overconfidence of the English command. After the archers were scattered and the cavalry was finally bogged down in battle, the English formation began to disintegrate. The Scottish shield walls, like three giant presses, relentlessly pushed the enemy toward the river. At that moment, the battle turned into a rout. The English knights and infantry, trapped between a wall of spears and the marshy bank, lost all control. Commanders could not give orders, and soldiers could not hear them. Panic ensued. Those in the rear ranks tried to retreat, creating even greater congestion. King Edward II, watching the battle from a safe distance, realized that it was all over. His personal guard, seeing the army collapse, grabbed the king by force and carried him away from the battlefield. The king's flight signaled the general collapse of the army. When soldiers see their leader running away, the army ceases to exist. Discipline evaporated instantly. Now it was every man for himself. What had been the most powerful army in Europe turned into an uncontrollable mob, desperately trying to save itself. At that very moment, another largely symbolic episode took place. The Scottish baggage train, consisting of servants, cooks, squires, and other lowly folk, watched the battle from a hill. Seeing the English flee, this crowd, armed with whatever they could find, pitchforks, axes, knives, rushed down the hill with cries of joy. To the demoralized English army, it looked as if a fresh, huge Scottish reserve had entered the battle. This was the last straw. The panic turned into a total, uncontrollable retreat. Knights threw down their weapons and armor, trying to get off the field as quickly as possible. The retreat was disastrous. The river Bannockburn, which was supposed to protect the English, became a trap for them. Many drowned trying to cross. The bridges were blocked, and the fords turned into a mess. The Scots pursued the fleeing soldiers, giving them no chance to recover. It was not just a defeat, It was complete annihilation. In 2 days of battle, the English army, the pride of Edward II, virtually ceased to exist as an organized force. Thousands of soldiers were lost. Hundreds of lords and knights were taken prisoner. Robert Bruce did not just win a victory. He achieved a triumph that no one expected. He did not just defend Stirling. He proved that a small but disciplined nation fighting for its freedom could defeat a vast empire. The victory was stunning. Huge trophies, including the entire treasury of the English army, fell to the Scots. But more importantly, so many noble English barons were taken prisoner that Bruce was able to exchange them all for his family, who had been held captive by the English for many years. The field at Bannockburn became a symbol of Scottish independence. It was a day when the tactics, cunning, and iron will of one man and his army proved stronger than steel and gold. The empire was broken. The consequences of the Battle of Bannockburn were far more significant than England's military defeat. This battle became not only a turning point in Scottish history, but also a major event for the whole of Europe at the beginning of the 14th century. Robert Bruce's victory changed the perception of Scotland in the eyes of its neighbors and allies. It proved that even a small kingdom could resist imperial power if it had the will to be free and a talented leader. Bannockburn became a symbol of national revival, and Bruce's name became synonymous with courage and independence. This victory immediately and irrevocably established Robert Bruce as the undisputed King of Scotland. Before the battle, his position had been shaky. Some clans remained loyal to the English crown, while others simply waited to see who would win. After the defeat of Edward II, all doubts disappeared. Even those who had once considered Bruce a usurper recognized his right to the throne. The victory united a country torn apart by internal strife and war into a single entity. From then on, the name Robert Bruce was spoken with respect, even among his enemies. All the Scottish clans that had previously wavered or even fought against him now swore allegiance. It was a rare occasion when the proud and independent families of Scotland united under one banner. Before that, each region and each clan had its own interests and rarely acted together. The victory at Bannockburn changed everything. It proved that only unity could provide the strength necessary to defend freedom. Even those far to the north, in lands where Bruce's influence had previously been weak, now recognized his supreme authority. Thus, a new united Scotland was born. The military significance of the battle was enormous. It showed that the usual rules of warfare no longer worked. Medieval armies relied on knights, heavily armed horsemen who were considered invincible. But Bruce had a different army. Disciplined infantry fighting in tight ranks. Their spears held at an angle turned the formation into an impenetrable wall. It was this approach that overturned the idea of what decided the outcome of a battle: the strength of a knight or the steadfastness of a soldier. Bannockburn was the moment when it became clear that the era of the undisputed dominance of heavy cavalry was coming to an end. For centuries, European armies had relied on knights, believing that one armed horseman was worth 10-foot soldiers. But the Scots under Bruce's command proved otherwise. Their success showed that well-trained infantry, united by discipline and a common goal, could crush any cavalry. This battle was discussed at length in Europe, and many commanders began to rethink their military doctrines. Well-trained, tactically competent, and organized infantry armed with long spears could not only resist knights but also defeat them. The Scots practiced their techniques on marshy and uneven terrain, where cavalry lost its advantage. Their ranks stood immovable, like a fortress wall, and each fighter knew his place. They did not flinch when an avalanche of armor and horses descended upon them. When the knightly attack faltered, the infantry counterattacked, turning the enemy's defeat into a panicked retreat. It was a victory of mind over strength. Bannockburn was a harbinger of other great battles where infantry and discipline prevailed over knighthood. Decades later, similar ideas emerged in France, where at Crécy and Azincourt, English archers demonstrated the superiority of new tactics. But it was Bruce who was the first to prove that knights could be defeated through steadfastness and calculation. His shield wall, a dense formation of warriors with spears pointing in all directions, became a model for military schools across Europe. It embodied a simple but powerful idea: unity and training are stronger than gold and titles. Despite the crushing defeat, England did not immediately recognize Scotland's independence. Edward II's pride prevented him from accepting the loss of control over the north. In his eyes, Bruce remained a rebel, not a king. English chroniclers tried to downplay the significance of the defeat, calling it an accident. However, each new clash showed that the English no longer had their former advantage. Their army had lost confidence, while Scotland, on the contrary, had gained new strength. Edward II, though humiliated, refused to recognize Bruce as king. The war dragged on for another 14 long years, but its nature changed. England could no longer advance, but only tried to hold on to its fortresses. Each campaign turned into a series of failures because the Scots knew the terrain and used surprise tactics. It was not an open battle, but an exhausting struggle, where Bruce had the determination and support of the people on his side. Gradually, England realized that it was impossible to defeat Scotland by force. Encouraged by their victory, the Scots took the war to English soil. Their troops crossed the border and burned villages, reminding the enemy of their recent humiliation. These raids were short but devastating. The northern counties of England, which had lived in peace for centuries, now suffered from constant attacks. English lords were forced to spend their energy and money on defending their lands rather than on new conquests. Thus, the war that began as an attempt to subjugate its neighbors turned into a struggle for survival for England. England was forced to switch from aggression to defense. After Bannockburn, its military machine lost its offensive spirit. Pride was replaced by fear of its northern neighbors, who had previously been considered savages. Now even the word Scotland caused anxiety among English soldiers. This psychological change proved to be no less important than the defeat itself. Bannockburn broke England's offensive potential for an entire generation. The most important political consequence of the battle was the appearance in 1320 of one of the most significant documents in world history, the Declaration of Arbroath. This letter from the Scottish barons to the Pope was not just a diplomatic appeal, but a true manifesto of freedom. It expressed the pride of a people who no longer wished to live under foreign rule. The barons explained that their struggle was not against a specific ruler, but against the very principle of subjugation. This document became the voice of a new nation that had realized its freedom. The declaration contained a phrase that was centuries ahead of its time. The barons declared that they were fighting not for glory or wealth, but for freedom, which no honest man would give up except with his life. It was a statement that sounded like an oath before the whole world. It emphasized that loyalty to the country was higher than loyalty to any monarch. And even if Robert Bruce tried to submit to England, they promised to overthrow him and choose a new leader. These words already contained the idea of popular sovereignty. This was a truly revolutionary idea for the Middle Ages. At that time, it was believed that power was given to the king by God, and the people had to obey without question. But the Scots dared to say that the king existed for the people, and not the other way around. This principle later became the basis of democratic thinking in Europe. Many historians believe that it was in the Declaration of Arbroath that the voice of future popular revolutions was first heard. It was a document in which freedom was proclaimed to be more important than the crown. Many researchers see the Declaration of Arbroath as one of the sources of inspiration for the American Declaration of Independence. The idea that the people have the right to overthrow a government that oppresses them has traveled across centuries and oceans. The phrase about liberty and life was reflected in the American slogan about the right to happiness and independence. Thus, the message of the 13th century Scottish barons became the spiritual precursor of a whole new world. This proves that ideas born in struggle can survive generations and change the fate of humanity. It was only in 1328, after the overthrow of Edward II, that England officially recognized Scotland's independence. This happened under the Treaty of Northampton, which enshrined the Scottish people's right to self-determination. For many, this was not just a diplomatic act, but a symbol of the triumph of justice. Robert Bruce lived to see this moment, seeing his dream become a reality. He died a year later, but he died as the king of a free country, not an exile. His name went down in history as the name of a liberator. The Battle of Bannockburn is not just a story about a medieval battle. It is a story of courage, patience, and strategic genius that turned weakness into strength. It shows how engineering, knowledge of the terrain, and the people's belief in victory can crush even the most powerful army. It is an example of how the idea of freedom can unite people more strongly than fear or power, and so Bannockburn remains a symbol of resistance and hope for all peoples who fight for their right to be independent. This legacy lives on in Scotland to this day. The site of the battle has become not just a field, but a sacred symbol of resilience. Every year, people come here to remember how their ancestors defended their freedom against the strongest enemy. The memory of Bannockburn is woven into songs, legends, and coats of arms, reminding us that courage knows no time. Even after 7 centuries, this story inspires those who are not afraid to go against fate. Bannockburn is not just a place on the map, but an eternal symbol of the triumph of spirit over force. We have come full circle on this incredible campaign. From the desperate guerrilla warfare of an outlaw king to a carefully planned trap that ensnared the most powerful army in Europe. The story of Bannockburn is a classic example of asymmetric warfare, where intelligence, cunning, and knowledge of the terrain proved more important than numbers and heavy armor. Robert Bruce and his army of spearmen didn't just win a battle, they won their nation's right to exist and change the rules of warfare. They proved that invincible heavy cavalry had its weaknesses, and that well-trained infantry could be a decisive force on the battlefield. What other impossible victories in history, where underdogs crushed empires, would you like to see on our channel? Perhaps the Battle of Agincourt, where English archers stopped the French knights, or the story of the Vietnamese resistance? Suggest your topics in the comments. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new dives into the most exciting and pivotal moments in history.